Ba-ba-bam, bam, 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 ba-ba-bam. Hola, benvinguts a una nova cullerada de ciència. Avui amb una nova secció. És una secció d'interviu, d'entrevista, i per avui he portat aquesta noia, Xiaoyue Li, que ens va visitar. Com que no parla el català, seguirem en anglès i després podreu trobar els subtítols, d'acord? Així que dono la benvinguda. Hi, Xiaoyue. So she is a physicist at TRIUMPH. She studied in the Wuhan University where she graduated. Then she went for her PhD at Stony Brook. Then she did her first postdoc in MPI, Max Planck Institute für Physik, in Munich. I think I said that too, and now I said she is a physicist at TRIUMPH. So we have several questions. Hi, Xiaoyue. Nice to meet you. I'm really happy to have Xiaoyue because we have been friends for quite a while already, and we are here next to the IPMU building, Institute for Physics and the Mathematics of the Universe. So we have a very nice background. So my first question is, what are your current interests? I like to know, or I think people would like to know what you are working on.
So my main focus now is to understand the neutrino oscillation through the measurement of man-made neutrinos and neutrinos coming from the atmosphere. So neutrinos are one of the fundamental, three of the fundamental particles of in the standard model of particle physics. So they are very peculiar compared to the other particles. So the neutrinos are very, very light. We know that from other neutrino oscillation experiments, and they're neutrally charged, unlike your electrons, which has a negative charge. So neutrinos only participate in weak interaction. So that means they rarely interact. So as we sit here, every second, 100 trillion neutrinos pass through our body, but none of them will actually interact. So that's how weakly interacting they are, which means they're extremely difficult for experiments to detect them. And for that reason, we normally build these massive neutrino detectors. So the famous Super-Kamiokande detector, which Luis has talked about, has 50 kilotons of ultra-pure water sitting underground, and we just sit there and wait and detect the neutrinos from the atmosphere and from the man-made sources. So by man-made neutrino, I really mean the neutrinos that we create by bombarding a beam of protons onto a graphite target, and these hadronic interactions will produce a lot of mesons and other hadrons, and these particles will decay, and that decay produces the neutrinos that we can detect many kilometers away. And so why are there neutrinos from the atmosphere? So these neutrinos are produced from the interaction or the collision between cosmic ray particles, which are mostly protons, and also alpha particles, etc. And these are really high energy particles, and they can interact with the molecules in the atmosphere. And this same kind of hadronic interaction and then decay that produce these man-made neutrinos will also so the same processes can also produce the neutrinos from the atmosphere. So these are neutrinos that are quite energetic compared to the neutrinos coming from the sun, and we can use extremely large detectors to measure them. And in particular, for the long baseline, for the man-made neutrinos, typically your far detector sits hundreds of kilometers away from where they're produced. And by comparing the neutrino spectrum before they oscillate and after they propagate for hundreds of kilometers and oscillation happens, and we can measure the spectra again, and by comparing this before and after, we can extract these neutrino oscillation parameters.
Yeah, we also see the same type of neutrinos and so on. I think it's funny because these atmospheric neutrinos, right, they are showering to us all the time, but we are like, yeah, whatever. But these atmospheric neutrinos, they, at least here at the surface, they come also with many other particles, so we need to build these detectors in mountains so we can shield our detector from these other many particles, but only get the neutrinos that go through, and we can do our studies.
Yes.
Right.
Of course. That's an important point. Why they have to be deep underground is to shield these cosmic muons.
Yeah. So you work on Hyper-K. What are your tasks there?
Yeah, Hyper-Kamiokande is the next generation flagship particle physics experiment in Japan. So the current generation of this kind of experiment is called T2K. It stands for Tokai to Kamioka. It's a long baseline.
Two towns of Japan, Tokai and Kamioka.
Yeah, one on the east coast, one almost on the west coast. Mm-hmm. So they're about 300 kilometers apart. So we already did a lot of amazing things with the current experiment, but they're not quite good enough for what we want to do next in terms of measuring these neutrino oscillation properties and also many more different physics topics. So we want to build this next generation detector. So Hyper-Kamiokande will also be a long baseline neutrino experiment, also from Tokai to Kamioka. But so Super-K is about 40 meters high and 40 meters wide, but Hyper-K will be about 70 meters by 70 meters. So it's a much larger detector, also filled with ultra-pure water and instrumented with ultra-sensitive light detectors inside.
Better than the Super-K ones, right?
Better than the Super-K, yeah. They're more sensitive. And the way we measure the neutrinos in these detectors is through their interactions with the water. So a neutrino could come in and interact with the water, and of course most of them will not interact, but occasionally an interaction happens and a charged particle, such as your electrons or muons, are produced. And these particles can travel faster than the speed of light in water. Very, very important distinction.
We don't want to hit the headlines of any newspaper tomorrow.
Right. So when this is the case, these charged particles will emit Cherenkov radiation. So these are kind of cones of light centered around the particle direction. And we detect these Cherenkov lights using these ultra-sensitive light detectors instrumented on the inside of these detector walls. So that's how we kind of see neutrino interactions in these detectors.
Indirectly, right?
Yeah.
That's
indirectly. That's
how
right.
we can see them. Yeah. But it's nice to see those patterns in our event displays where you can see the rings. So it's kind of funny.
Yeah.
Okay.
So my particular task the thing I'm most interested in is how to calibrate the detector better. So calibration is a process where you try to understand what the things your detector can measure actually means. So for example, we can measure a length of something with a ruler, and the way that the thing is 10 centimeters is by looking at the tick marks on your ruler. Mm-hmm. But imagine, with our detector, it's as if we're giving a ruler without these tick marks, and we need to do measurements to understand what the unit distance on my ruler actually means in reality. So that's the process of calibration. And how well we can do the calibration, or actually it also depends on how sensitive your detector is. It will determine whether my smallest tick mark is 1 centimeter, 1 millimeter, or 1/10 of a millimeter. So right now, going from T to K to Hyper-K, we want to reduce the smallest tick mark by quite a lot, which is why we kind of need this more sensitive detector. And we need to perform better calibration.
The smaller you can read these tick marks, the better, right?
Yes.
It's a basically never-ending task, I believe, because I think for every experiment they keep on trying to improve the calibration till basically they shut down the
of course,
detector.
It's very expensive experiment. We have to do everything we can to fulfill its full potential in terms of sensitivity.
Yes. Okay, that's nice, because I think many people don't. Many people may think that you have your detector, you turn it on, and you start right ahead to the measurements, and you can do everything. But in principle, you need some time until the detector kind of sits down and works stably, and then you can calibrate, and then you can try to start extracting the information you really like. So that's a very important task there.
Yeah, and it's not easy.
Not very rewarding either, right? So I think people really appreciate this kind of work. So of course, detectors are very impressive and so on, but I like you to kind of try to link this to discoveries or recent discoveries. If you could explain us more, what can we do with this detector?
So in Japan, it's very well known what the 2015 Nobel Prize was awarded to. So it.
And in Canada, by the way, TRIUMPH is a Canadian institution. So the Arthur MacDonald. Also
Art MacDonald was also awarded the Nobel Prize at the same time.
Mm-hmm.
So that's for the discovery of essentially neutrino mass. So originally, the standard model of particle physics assumed that neutrinos are massless, and that has a lot of advantages in terms of theory and model building. But the neutrino oscillation experiments, so in this case, Super-Kamiokande, the atmospheric neutrino in Super-Kamiokande, and the solar neutrino in SNOW experiment, they observed neutrino oscillations, and that proves that neutrinos are actually massive.
Have to,
Yeah. So that's, kind of, that was a big deal. And also, just precisely measure these neutrino oscillation parameters is important, because they're the fundamental parameters in a fundamental theory of particle physics. And understanding neutrino properties also have implications in terms of the evolution of the universe. So it's important to this is nature. This is the dictionary of nature, and we just need to know. We have to know.
Yeah, otherwise we can't get the fundamentals of the physics, and especially maybe important also at the beginning of the universe, when it was created, and we don't understand many things, how they actually went, because those energies are far away from what we can get in our experiments, right? So is there anything topic that you would like to tell our audience?
You mean another topic that I'm interested
that
in?
is related to these different type of neutrinos, man-made, natural neutrinos. What can we do with that? What exactly can we learn?
So another question that these long baseline neutrinos can help answer is, for example, whether there are only 3 generations of neutrinos, whether there are, more neutrinos that don't interact very much. So these are what we call sterile neutrinos. So for these long baseline experiments, there's always a near detector as well. So that's a detector or a series of detectors that you place very close to where the neutrinos are produced.
Where you suppose there are no oscillations yet.
Right, no oscillation yet. And so if they see a deficit in the number of neutrinos they detect, then that can point to the existence of sterile neutrinos which mix with the standard model neutrinos. And that because the sterile neutrinos don't interact at all, and that would lead to a deficit. So anything like that would be quite groundbreaking for particle physics as well. And there are also other different kinds of experiments that study neutrinos. For example, the Neutrinoless double beta decay experiments, where they search for a very rare process. So
it's so rare. I think most of the people don't hear about this topic so often. So, please explain to us what is this.
People are probably heard of the beta decay process. So it's a neutron decays into proton and electron and neutrino. But Neutrinoless, so double beta decay is a process where two neutrons go into two protons and two electrons and two neutrinos. So this is double beta decay. So this is a very rare nuclear process.
In one nucleus, right? In one single
in the same nucleus. This typically has lifetime, more than 10 to the 20. I want to say years or seconds. I can't remember exactly. But it's a very has a very very long half-life. And if neutrinos are their own antiparticles, then you can so this process can happen without the two neutrinos. So it's just two neutrons going to two electrons and two protons.
Right. That's what we call Majorana. If they were so-called Majorana particles, right?
Yeah. If neutrinos are their own antiparticles, then they're called Majorana particles. So if they're Majorana particles, you can have Neutrinoless double beta decay. So this is with our current understanding of the neutrino properties, this is an even rarer process if it happens at all. And there are lots of experiments that are made of these isotopes that can potentially have these processes, and they sit and they wait for Neutrinoless double beta decay to happen. And of course, if we observe that, it would also be a groundbreaking thing for particle physics, and that opens the door to a lot of it has implications on from everything from cosmology to astroparticle physics and to fundamental
Suddenly
physics.
we would know something really important about the neutrino, right? It's Majorana, and that would be
and the origin of the universe.
And suddenly these two electrons, they would have a very defined energy, so it would be a help for us at least to try to distinguish with whether it is a Neutrinoless double beta decay as we think, or just by chance, it went into two neutrons decayed, and then we don't see the neutrinos, right? That could be difficult to see whether it's a really Neutrinoless double beta decay or just by chance two neutrons decaying. That's a very difficult topic, I believe, and it's not easy. I mean, so far, no clue, and it would be great to see some experiment claiming to see something.
I think it might be a long wait.
What is your bet? Do you have any preferred?
I can't second guess nature, but it will be more interesting if neutrinos are Majorana particles, for sure.
I wanted to ask you, when you were talking about sterile neutrinos, what is your stand in that? You can. You don't have to answer if you don't. But
so there have been a few experiments in the past that claimed that they observed sterile neutrinos, like LSND, mini boom. And then people have built subsequent experiments to try and study that region, and So that has been so far excluded. So there's a lot of tension in that part of the data. Personally, I think it was some kind of low energy processes that involves photons and that we didn't quite understand. If I have to bet my money, I would bet that's not a sterile neutrino.
Betting money. Okay. So maybe we can go to slightly different topic and ask you for your other interest in physics, maybe.
Yeah, so I spent 3 years when I was in Germany working on a dark matter experiment. So dark matter is kind of a blanket term for all the massive things in the universe that are not made of standard model particles. So these are, we think they could be particles, and some people think that they're other things, and some people think it's modified gravity. But in any case, we need kind of something that only modifies or interacts with gravity, but not any of the other known forces or known particles there to explain the structural formation and the evolution of the universe as we know it. So this is kind of, it's a long term for things that we can see. Dark for something we put under the carpet because we don't really know what's going on, right? So it's they have a very strong case in the current kind of standard cosmology model. So you really need this dark matter there to explain everything we see. So of course, we're particle physicists, so our instinct is to think of it as a new particle that we can possibly detect, and even detect them on Earth.
Give Nobel Prizes.
Of course, that would be, if one day an experiment claimed that they found dark matter particle, that would be the biggest thing that will happen in my lifetime, I think.
Probably, yeah.
And of course, there are lots of theories about what dark matter is. And in the past few decades, the most famous, the most searched for dark matter candidate is the so-called weakly interacting massive particle, or WIMP. It's a good name. But we built detectors, increasingly larger detectors, over the past decades to search for them, and we came back empty.
More and more sensitive.
And so some people have, some theories have come up with lots of different hypotheses for what these particles are. And when I was in Germany, the dark matter candidate that we are focused on was the so-called QCD axions. So these axions, if they exist and they form dark matter, they would, and if they make up a large portion of the galactic dark matter halo that Earth is in, we can hope to detect them on Earth by using their interaction with two photons. So, it's very. So the technologies that these axion experiments use are very different from the more traditional WIMP dark matter experiments. So
in size and.
In both size and the kind of technology that they use.
The physics underlying these kind of detectors, right? Yeah,
definitely. It's a lot of electromagnetism rather than the kind of more traditional particle physics where we think of particles as really, particles. It's a more wavy kind of dark matter there.
In some sense, I have the feeling they try to be more clever and less massive. I mean, maybe just because we didn't detect them yet, and once we detect them, we would try to, hypothetically, if we find them, then we would need bigger detectors again to try to better understand the different parameters. But for now, they try to really be clever, and that's the whole point for now. So if you could tell us a little bit more about this experiment. It's running now, or it's done, or?
No, it's more, it's an experiment, or the technique that we used was still in its early stages. it's not an established experiment. So the most famous axion experiment is perhaps the ADMX experiment that was operated at they're still operating at University of Washington in Seattle. So there they have a cavity, a microwave cavity. It's essentially a cylinder of copper, and they put this copper cavity inside of a magnetic field, usually a strong magnetic field, because that enhances your sensitivity. And this whole thing was cooled to tens of millikelvin temperature in order to reduce the noise.
Yeah.
And if the axions are the dark matter, and they make up everything in the dark matter halo,
they are like here with us. And
and so the axion will, because of the existence of the strong magnetic field, you can essentially convert an axion into a microwave photon. Okay, in their case, it's I think it's hundreds of hundreds of megahertz photon, and this photon signal can be enhanced because you couple it to this cavity, and it would essentially, so if axion exists, it would essentially be a small bump on their noise spectrum.
Yeah.
So this is how, just a very hand-wavy way of saying this is how they are detecting the axions.
You must kind of tune the different parameters where you are searching to different.
That's right. That's right. So the unknown parameter here is the axion mass.
Yeah.
And because the axion essentially converts all of its energy, which includes the rest mass, into the energy of the photon. So of course the axion, and it's cold dark matter, so essentially the photon energy is directly proportional to the axion mass.
Yeah.
So because we don't know the axion mass, this cavity needs to be tunable in frequency so that we can search, a wide range
for
of
the
possible
radio.
axion mass. It's like an ultra sensitive radio. What is it called?
Radio station, Alex.
Sorry.
Anyway, you have to basically.
It's a very, very sensitive radio.
Yeah.
That allows you to hear really tiny signals.
Yeah.
Is that what you mean?
Huh?
Antenna?
It's not antenna.
Okay, so these are basically different scale of experiments, more like tabletop kinds.
Yeah, like our experiment, Super-K, is 50 kilotons, and it's
Definitely
massive.
not something you want to put in your table.
Right. And so the cavity that ADMX uses, for example, is probably this size. So, of course, it's not. When we say tabletop, we just mean much smaller. So they have to put this whole thing in the dilution fridge. But in the end, it's the instrument is not very big.
Yeah.
It's probably as tall as you.
I see. I think these are really very interesting experiments because, at least in Catalonia, most of the money is spent in big experiments because we have little money in general for science. So maybe some people they will be coming and say, hey, that's not true, we are doing this kind of experiments. Maybe, but I'm not so aware of them. And I think by trying to go clever, they try to really, they're exploring things of physics that otherwise are difficult to explore. And I agree with most of the community, I believe as well, that we have to invest money in them. So in that sense, I'm happy that there are quite many efforts on that, and it's nice you have been taking, working on such an experiment. I suppose very different from our field in neutrino.
It's quite different.
So it had to be very interesting. Okay, I would like to change topics, as you know, and go to different but related, of course. It's still something to do with physics, because I want to ask you what is your history, the history behind you becoming a physicist. So how did you become a physicist?
Oh, well, it's a bit of a cliche, really. I mean, it's the same reason as why a lot of people got into this business, right? I was interested in these big questions about, nature and the universe, and I liked the fact that in hard sciences there is a clear boundary between what's right and what's wrong, and evidence is the only thing that matters, not opinions. So that's another thing that kind of drew to me. And I didn't do too badly at school on these subjects, and I decided to do a degree in science in college. I was a little bit in between math and physics at one point, and then I watched the movie Contact, another cliche, and I thought that's what I want to do.
Yeah.
So.
I think it's a great movie, and I have another video in Catalan where I kind of talk about it, because I was in Hokkaido, and part of the movie takes place in Hokkaido. But I agree, it's a great movie, and
it aged well.
Yeah, from the 90s, so that's why that shows how old she is somehow. So okay, so yeah. I think
watched it in high school, so I didn't watch it when it came out immediately.
So you can narrow now even better than before how old Xiaoyue is. Okay, of course, being a female scientist, I mean, when we run in our careers, we run on several obstacles, and it's clearly different when it's a male or white male, like my case, or if you are from another, you have another cultural background, you are a female, and you try to go into such a community like the physics community. Maybe it's not the worst one, but it's the one we live in, and I wanted to ask you, what are the challenges that you have to face as a female scientist or physicist?
I think if we were to talk about the difference, or the different way that men and women, or even boys and girls, are treated, then you have to go back to infancy, really. I mean, we were given different toys, usually. Maybe not as much these days. I had my dolls and Barbies, and my cousins, and they were boys, and they had trucks and Legos, and then when we went to school, you can feel this palpable sentiment that certain subjects are just not meant for girls, and even the teachers, whether consciously or unconsciously, they try to direct girls into history and literature, whereas direct boys into the hard sciences. And I've even heard sayings that girls do well because they work hard, and boys do well because they're smart. And it's this kind of constant, day after day hints that I think prevented a lot of girls to further pursue science in their higher education. And even when I actually went to college, I think there was probably 10% women in my class at the time. And even there, I've heard my classmates say things like, why are there even girls in physics department?
Yeah.
And
hopefully this doesn't happen at least as often as before, and always less and less. But I think we all heard comments about female physicists and what they expect to do in their career. So it's not always easy, right? Because when you are a child, you are softer in some way, and then it depends a lot how you take it, that you may go one way or another. And I suppose in your case, I mean, you are here, obviously it didn't hurt you too
stubborn.
much, but
Yeah.
it wasn't probably easy, right? I remember my wife having a similar experience where she was told, oh, don't do maths because that's for men, do instead economy or something. So yeah, kind of.
Yeah, and when girls didn't do as well at school, they, even if their grades are on par with the boys, they're still thought of as less capable, and they're judged much harsher than the boys were. They're just kind of a selection bias every step on the way, which is why we end up with this disparity in the numbers today. And just going beyond the student years, right? When you go to a postdoc or junior faculty, I feel like sometimes it feels like the society is built in a way that the system is designed in a way that didn't really have women's needs particularly in mind. Like academics, especially early career academics, have to move around quite a bit, and I feel like women have to more often make these hard decisions, whether to prioritize your career, having a family, things like that. That I'm sure a lot of men do have to face as well, but the reality is a bit harsher on women still.
Yeah. I mean, most of the societies we lived in, they tend to dump all the family work or family-related work into women instead of being more equally distributed to both men and women, right? So that's a difficult and very tough question, because many institutions, they also try to in some way help. Like IPMU, it's kind of very new in Japan in that sense as well, because they try to help female colleagues to also depend less on what the society expects from you, and you have here childcare and things like this. But even though that's not always the panacea or anything, because everybody else will still looking at you if your child gets sick or something, right? So it's always difficult.
Yeah, but I have to say that it's not just the responsibility of academia to change this. It's also the responsibility of the whole society. For example, at least in Japan, you have free childcare, free daycares, which is great. But these kind of things don't happen even in most developed countries. And in the US and Canada, childcare costs is through the roof. And this places undue burden on all of the young families, and so I think that makes it more likely for women to have to kind of sacrifice their career, and not just for physicists.
Yeah, actually not only for physicists. I must say there are many caveats in this, because in Japan it's not that great either. I mean, there are many difficulties in accessing to these kind of cares. I know, because I have 2 children, and it's not that easy. But anyway, better than other countries, of course. You have been in different countries. You have been in China, you have been in the US, you are in Canada, you have been in Germany, in Europe. So maybe you can tell us, what are your feelings? I mean, this has also been through different times, right?
So
it's always difficult to...
Oh, that's dangerous.
As far as you can tell us.
I'm going to get into trouble anyway. Well, however I rank these countries. No, I'm not going to rank the countries, but of course there's lots of cultural differences, and the differences in how they treat women and how they treat women in science. I mean, some countries do it better than the others. and there's definitely more awareness in North America compared to the other countries I've lived in.
To place the US as number one somehow?
I think the US and Canada are probably... So there's definitely more discussions about these issues and more awareness and more initiatives to address them in these countries. That based on my personal experience. Of course.
Okay, something we need to think about and try to improve in each culture, right? In Japan, it's that's one reason why the birth rate here is on the floor, because it's quite difficult, I believe. My wife is kind of an exception, but not easy, never easy. Every country has its own problems. Another question for you would be if you have seen changes through the years. I mean, you are not that old, even though she's quoting films from the 90s, but you have been also in different countries, but maybe you can see some kind of trend if you want.
Yeah, I think it's definitely there's progress. At least when I was in college, we just didn't really talk about this. But now more people are being made aware of the obstacles that women face, and hopefully more realistic changes will happen. And you definitely see the slight increase in the number of women being hired for junior faculties. At least that's what I noticed, and that's a very good thing. And representations, not just on the student and postdoc level, but on the higher levels. I think that's crucial, and that's going to have a big impact. Not immediately, maybe, but maybe a decade or so down the line. We need to promote more women.
That's like the seeds for the future, right? You also young girls, when they say, okay, it's not so uncommon to be there working in physics, so why not? I could be there too. So in that sense, I like you to say to the audience, or if somebody has some daughter or anything, and if you have an advice for those young girls, young women that are thinking, or they like physics, or they like science in general, if you had some advice.
I remember when I was a young student, I sometimes felt quite intimidated by the intelligence of very outspoken men, but gradually you realize that volume isn't everything. It doesn't speak directly to the quality of your research. And really even the grades in high school, in college, they aren't really the best indicator of how well you would do in research, because research isn't about taking an exam. It's not a sprint, it's a marathon. You have to constantly put in the effort. You just have to sit down and work at a problem and think deep until it gets solved. So research is about intelligence, of course, but it's also about a lot of other qualities. And women can be good at science. Just if you're interested, just don't feel intimidated and just give it a go at least.
It's often like this, right? You see these old guys, they sit there and they look like they know about everything, but after a while you realize they also have their own weaknesses.
Definitely.
And that also it's a lot of experience that you also need time to acquire this experience as well.
I guess it's easy when most of the top scientists are men, and women look at them and compare ourselves with them. Then of course they have decades more experience, and we feel lesser by comparison.
Yeah.
Uh,
They started running in this marathon earlier.
yeah, and it's not a fair comparison.
Yeah.
So, but I can understand, people feel discouraged and intimidated by that. No, but just talk yourself out of it. Don't be.
Yeah. If you like science, right?
Yeah.
And you like what you do and you like the topic, then go for that.
Yeah, and young people have all the time in the world to try things out, so why not?
Mm-hmm. So there you go. If you're interested, now you know what you have to care about and nothing else.
No, I'm not saying you shouldn't care about anything else, but
Well, yeah.
also, even if it doesn't work out, I think training in physics is quite valuable. Even if you just want to do other things, it teaches you, a critical way of thinking.
And if you enjoy that, then
Yeah.
you already.
And you learn a lot of transferable skills.
We are getting almost to the end. I think it's been already a while, maybe longer than I thought, but I think we have very nice and interesting discussions. I also wanted to kind of see the interplay between gender and cultural background. It's not only gender what plays a role, of course. So there are we are all kind of a multiplicity of identities. And I'd like to ask you, what are the difficulties when navigating in the physics community in your experience?
Yeah, so I was a young international student when I went to the States. I went there, I didn't know anything. I didn't know the inner workings of their academic ecosystem.
Completely new country as well. So.
New country, and I came from a country with quite different cultural background. So at the beginning, even basic things like getting to know people and making friends can be quite difficult. And of course, there is almost inevitable that there are people that would mistreat you because of your gender or ethnicity, and it can feel very hurtful, and I often felt alienated, but you just have to realize that it's not your fault, and you have to surround yourself with a group of supportive people. And of course, sometimes you have to fight back. You have to raise awareness for these kind of issues. And also, like, we work in these large international collaborations, and there are people from different places, and there's inevitably sometimes a clash of cultures. It's just we just do things in different ways, and sometimes people are not. A lot of times people are not behaving in a way that you don't like because they're bad people, just because they're not aware.
Yeah.
They lived in their own bubble. So in that case, you just need kind of more communication and just more discussion to facilitate this mutual understanding.
Yeah. Sometimes our expectations, right, tell us this should go like this way, but when you are working with a person with a very different cultural background, and they do things differently, and you think, oh God, what's going on? Why like this? And that's kind of, at least in my opinion, that's something like nice, because you realize your way is not always the best way,
or not the only way,
in any case, right? So you can learn a lot by working with these many different countries and cultural backgrounds, because not only countries, sometimes from one institution there are many different cultures living in there, right? So it's super interesting. Maybe don't you think that maybe large experiment like Super-K, where you find these many different kinds of people and different origins and so on, it's easier to live than if you are in a small experiment. You may be either very lucky or very unlucky, if you want. And I suppose if you land into a experiment where you are kind of unlucky, then your experience can be kind of
for sure
bad, right?
Yeah, I did my PhD on TTK. I think that was a very good experience, and, because there really was effort that went into creating a more inclusive environment, especially for the younger generation.
Yeah.
And we definitely need that. And it's kind of easier to do from an organizational point of view for larger collaborations than smaller experiments.
I think this is, at least in the new experiments and new collaborations, this is something that it's really being now addressed, I believe. Like in 2K they did it, in Super-K not that much, but I think in Hyper-K we are inheriting somehow this way of thinking, right? Trying to integrate everything.
It's definitely a good thing that we're doing this in Hyper-K.
Yeah, I think for Japan it's plus point if you want something really, really nice to say. Okay, I don't know if there is anything else that you would like to explain or I don't know.
I don't think so.
Okay.
You're gonna cut this part, right?
I can cut anytime. All right, then we are done. So see you next Cullerada de Ciència. See you, bye.